They were given 30 days to leave the only home they'd known for 4 decades, but when the elderly couple opened a sealed door in the mansion's forbidden wing, what they found wasn't just worth $310 million. It was a secret powerful enough to rewrite history and challenge everything they believed about right and wrong. Before we dive into the story, make sure to smash subscribe because tomorrow we have an extra special story for you that will blow your mind. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in late September, slipped through the mail slot of the servant's entrance like a knife between ribs. Willa Crane, 73 years old with silver hair pulled back in her usual bun, picked it up from the worn stone floor where it had landed. Her hands, gnarled from decades of work but still steady, turned the thick cream-colored paper over once, twice. Certified mail, legal firm's return address embossed in raised black letters. Her heart knew before her mind did. "Thad," she called softly toward the kitchen where her husband hummed an old hymn while washing their breakfast dishes. "Thad, come here." Thaddeus Crane appeared in the doorway, dish towel slung over one shoulder, his 76-year-old frame still tall despite the slight stoop time had carved into his spine. He'd been handsome once, Willa thought, watching him approach. Hell, he was handsome still, in that weathered way that spoke of a life lived honestly. His blue eyes, faded now like old denim, caught hers and the humming stopped. "What is it?" he asked. She handed him the envelope. He held it at arm's length, squinting. His reading glasses were somewhere upstairs, probably on the nightstand where he always left them. But he didn't need glasses to recognize what this was. They'd both known it was coming. Rumors had circulated through town for months. The estate was being sold. Thornhill Manor, all 42 rooms of it, was finally changing hands after sitting in trust for nearly 3 decades. Thad opened it carefully, sliding one thick finger under the flap. Willa moved beside him so they could read together, her shoulder pressed against his arm. The letter was brief, legal language stripped down to its cruelest essentials. The property known as Thornhill Estate had been sold to Rockland Development Corporation. The transaction would close in 60 days. All current occupants were required to vacate within 30 days to allow for property inspection and demolition preparation. Demolition. Willa felt the word like a physical blow. Thad's hand trembled slightly, the paper rustling. "They're tearing it down," she whispered. "Says here we have 30 days, Thad replied, his voice carefully neutral in that way he had when emotions threatened to overwhelm him. 30 days to find somewhere else. They stood in the narrow hallway of what had once been the servants' quarters of Thornhill Manor, a sprawling Victorian mansion built in 1878 by tobacco money and railroad ambition. The Ashford family had owned it for 3 generations, until the last of them, Garrison Ashford, died in his sleep in 1997. He'd been 91 years old, a recluse who'd outlived his children, his wife, and most of his siblings. Willa and Thad had found him that morning, peaceful in his bed, hands folded across his chest like he'd composed himself for the end. That was 28 years ago now. The estate had passed into a family trust, managed by lawyers in the city who sent the Cranes a small monthly stipend and asked only that they maintain the property and keep intruders away. For 28 years, that's exactly what they'd done. They'd lived in the servants' wing, a modest 6-room apartment with its own entrance, its own kitchen, its own life tucked into the massive shadow of the manor. They'd kept the grounds tidy, the structure sound, the legacy intact. And now, 30 days. Willa moved to the window, looking out across the grounds. September morning light filtered through ancient oaks, casting long shadows across overgrown gardens that had once been the pride of the county. She and Thad did their best, but 2 people in their 70s couldn't maintain 40 acres alone. The grass grew wild in places. The fountain in the south garden had stopped working in 2012. The greenhouse glass was cracked in a dozen places. But it was still beautiful, still home. "I'll call Juniper," Thad said behind her. Their granddaughter, 32 years old and sharp as a tack, worked as a paralegal in town. If anyone could find a solution, some legal loophole or overlooked clause, it would be her. Willa nodded, but didn't turn around. She was remembering the first time she'd seen this place. 1982. She'd been 38 years old, Thad 41. They'd both been working at a hotel in the city, Willa in housekeeping, Thad in maintenance. The pay was terrible and the hours worse. Their daughter, Juniper's mother, was 15 and angry at the world. They'd needed a change, something stable, somewhere quiet. The Ashford estate had advertised for live-in caretakers, room and board plus a modest salary. The interview had been conducted by Garrison Ashford himself, a stern man with kind eyes who'd looked at their work-worn hands and asked only one question. Can you be trusted to care for something that doesn't belong to you as if it were your own? They'd both said yes. That was 43 years ago. Their daughter had finished high school in the local town, gone off to college, married, had Juniper, divorced, remarried, and eventually moved to Oregon, where she ran a bed and breakfast with her second husband. They saw her twice a year if they were lucky. But Juniper had stayed close, moved back to town after college, visited every Sunday with groceries and stories and the kind of fierce love that skipped a generation. The phone rang 6 times before Juniper picked up. Thad explained quickly, reading portions of the letter aloud. Willa heard Juniper's voice rise in pitch, sharp with disbelief and anger. Good, Willa thought. They'd need that anger. I'll be there in an hour, Juniper said, loud enough for Willa to hear from across the room. Don't do anything. Don't sign anything. I'm calling Sterling Huxley right now. Sterling Huxley was the closest thing to a friend they had in the legal world, a semi-retired attorney who handled simple wills and property disputes from a cluttered office above the hardware store. He'd helped them with their own will years back, making sure Juniper would be taken care of. He was honest, which in Willa's experience was rarer than it should be. After Thad hung up, they stood in silence. The grandfather clock in the main hall chimed 9 times, its brass weights visible through the glass door, swinging with mechanical precision. That clock had been keeping time since 1893. Willa wound it every Sunday morning without fail. Who would wind it after they left? We should start packing, Thad said finally. Packing what? Willa replied, sharper than she meant. We don't own anything here. The furniture, the dishes, even the bed we sleep in, it all belongs to the estate. We've got our clothes and a few photographs, that's it. 43 years condensed into 2 suitcases. Thad flinched. She regretted the words immediately, softening her tone. I'm sorry. Where do we even go? There's the assisted living place on Maple Street, Thad offered quietly. We're not that old, Willa said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. Thad's knees were bad. Her back ached constantly. They both took enough medication to stock a pharmacy, but assisted living meant giving up, meant admitting they'd reached the end of their usefulness. She wasn't ready for that. We'll figure it out, Thad said, pulling her into an embrace. He smelled like ivory soap and coffee, familiar as her own skin. We always do. But standing there in the narrow hallway with 30 days hanging over them like a blade, Willa wasn't so sure. Juniper arrived in 53 minutes, her small sedan kicking up gravel as she pulled around to the servants' entrance. She burst through the door like a storm, all wild dark curls and blazing brown eyes. She was short like Willa, compact and fierce, with her grandfather's stubborn jaw. Let me see it, she demanded, snatching the letter from the table before either of them could respond. She read it twice, lips moving slightly, legal training evident in the way her eyes tracked each clause. Bastards, she muttered. 30 days. They know exactly what they're doing. Not enough time to fight, not enough time to organize, just enough to make it look legal. Is it legal? Thad asked. We've lived here 43 years. Doesn't that count for something? You were employees of the estate, not tenants. Juniper said, pacing now. The trust paid you a stipend for caretaking services. Now the trust is dissolved, properties sold, employment's terminated. Legally, it's airtight. Willa sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs. So that's it then? No, Juniper said fiercely. That's not it. Sterling's meeting me here in 20 minutes. There has to be something. Adverse possession laws, tenant rights, something. But when Sterling Huxley arrived, shuffling through the door with his battered briefcase and apologetic expression, Willa knew before he spoke that there was nothing. He confirmed what Juniper had already explained, adding only that the developers were within their rights, that the trust had followed all legal requirements, that fighting would cost money they didn't have and time they'd already run out of. I'm sorry, he said, and Willa believed he meant it. If there was anything I could do— We know, Thad interrupted gently. We appreciate you coming out. After Sterling left, Juniper made tea none of them wanted and asked the question they'd been avoiding. Where will you go? We'll find something, Willa said automatically. Where? Juniper pressed. You need to be practical. You can't afford much on your social security. Most apartments won't take you without employment verification or a younger co-signer. We could stay with you, Thad offered quietly. Juniper's tiny apartment over the bakery had one bedroom and a pull-out couch. She shook her head sadly. You know I would in a heartbeat, but my lease specifically prohibits long-term guests. Mrs. Patterson already threatened to evict me when my college roommate stayed for 2 weeks. Then what? Willa asked, hearing her own voice crack. We're 73 and 76 years old. We've worked our entire lives, and now we're supposed to— What? Live in a shelter? Sleep in a car? No, Juniper said firmly. We'll figure something out. I'll call around. There are programs for seniors, housing assistance, something. But Willa saw the fear in her granddaughter's eyes. They all knew how this story usually ended for people like them. The next 2 weeks passed in a fog of phone calls and applications. Juniper worked tirelessly, compiling lists of subsidized senior housing, reaching out to churches and community organizations. Everywhere the answer was the same. Waiting lists 6 months to 2 years long, income requirements they didn't quite meet or barely exceeded, credit checks they couldn't pass because they'd never needed credit living on an estate. Willa and Thad went through the motions of daily life, maintaining the property even as the clock counted down. Thad mowed the lawn. Willa dusted the library. They wound the grandfather clock. They did these things because they'd always done them, because stopping would mean surrendering, and neither of them knew how to do that yet. At night, Willa lay awake listening to Thad's breathing beside her, steady and deep. She thought about the years that had passed in this place. She thought about their daughter's high school graduation party on the south lawn, paper lanterns strung between trees. She thought about the Christmas garrison Ashford had given them, a small bonus and handwritten note thanking them for their service. She thought about the morning she'd found him dead, and how she'd cried not just for him, but for the certainty that nothing stayed the same, that everything eventually crumbled. On the 14th day, with 16 days remaining, Willa went up to the attic. She'd been avoiding it, this final sorting through of 43 years. But they'd need to pack their personal items, the few boxes of photographs and mementos they'd accumulated. The attic above the servants' quarters was technically theirs, filled with the debris of their lives. Juniper's old toys, their daughter's school papers, Christmas decorations, broken things they'd meant to fix. The stairs creaked under her weight. Dust swirled in the afternoon light that filtered through the small octagonal window. The attic smelled like old wood and mothballs and memory. She worked methodically, opening boxes, deciding what to keep and what to leave behind. Most of it would have to stay. They had nowhere to put it. She found their wedding album, the photos faded but still clear enough to show their younger selves, impossibly young, impossibly hopeful. She set that aside. Keep her. She found Juniper's baby blanket, hand-knitted by a grandmother long dead. Keeper. She found a box of Thad's old tools, rusted and obsolete. Leave behind. In the far corner, behind a broken chair and 3 identical lamps missing their shades, she found something she didn't remember storing. A large flat cardboard tube, the kind architects used for blueprints. It was covered in dust, sealed at both ends with dried tape. Curious, Willa pried off one end cap. Inside was a roll of yellowed paper. She pulled it out carefully, the paper crackling with age. When she unrolled it on the dusty floor, her breath caught. Blueprints, architectural drawings of Thornhill Manor, but not the current layout. These showed rooms she'd never seen, passages that didn't exist, wings that had been sealed off or demolished. The paper was labelled in faded ink, Thornhill Estate Original Plans, 1878. She studied them in the failing light. The main structure was recognizable, but the west wing looked completely different. According to these plans, there were 3 additional rooms beyond what currently existed, rooms accessed through passages that had been walled off. And there, in the northwest corner, a notation in cramped handwriting. Private vault. Access restricted. Private vault. Willa stared at the words. In 43 years of living here, she'd never heard Garrison Ashford mention a vault. She'd never seen these blueprints. The West Wing had always been off-limits, Garrison had explained once, because the structure was unsound, the floors dangerous. They'd respected that boundary, never questioning, never pushing. But now, with 16 days left, with nothing left to lose, Willa felt something stir in her chest. Curiosity. Or maybe it was defiance. She rolled up the blueprints carefully and climbed back down the attic stairs. Thad was in the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup for dinner. He looked up when she entered, saw the tube under her arm. "What's that?" "Something I found in the attic," Willa said, spreading the blueprints across the kitchen table. "Look at this." Thad put down the spoon and leaned over the drawings. His finger traced the West Wing layout, stopping at the notation about the vault. "Private vault," he read aloud. "I don't remember Garrison ever mentioning that." "Me neither," Willa said. "But look at the access point. It says here there's a door behind the library in the West Wing. We've never been back there." Thad straightened slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. "Because Garrison told us not to go, said it was dangerous." "What if it wasn't dangerous?" Willa said quietly. "What if he was hiding something?" They stared at each other across the table. Outside, evening was settling over the estate, shadows lengthening across overgrown lawns. "We have 16 days left in this house," Willa continued. 16 days before they tear it all down. If there's something back there, something Garrison wanted to keep hidden, shouldn't we know? Don't we deserve to understand this place after 43 years? Thad was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Do you remember that night about 10 years back? You were visiting Juniper in the hospital after she had her appendix out. I was here alone." Willa nodded. "I remember." "I heard something that night," Thad said slowly. "Coming from the West Wing, like machinery running or maybe ventilation. It was faint but steady, going all night. I almost went to investigate, but then I remembered Garrison's warnings. I figured it was just old pipes or something. But Willa, I've lived in old buildings my whole life. That wasn't pipes. That was something electrical, something powered." "You never told me," Willa said. "Didn't want to worry you," Thad replied. "And I convinced myself I'd imagined it, but I didn't, did I? There's something back there, something Garrison was protecting." They looked at the blueprints again. The vault location was clearly marked, tucked deep into the West Wing's unexplored territory. According to the drawings, there was a door in the library that led to a passage. The passage led to the vault. "We should call Juniper," Thad said, "if we're going to do this." "No," Willa interrupted. "Not yet. If there's nothing there, we'll have gotten her hopes up for nothing. And if there's something, well, we'll call her then." Thad studied his wife's face, seeing the determination there, the spark of something he hadn't seen in weeks. Purpose, maybe, or just the need to know, to understand the place that had been their home longer than anywhere else. "All right," he said finally. "After dinner, we'll go look." They ate soup in near silence, both too nervous to make much conversation. Willa washed the dishes while Thad found flashlights and fresh batteries. They changed into practical clothes, dark jeans and old sweatshirts, like they were preparing for something more significant than exploring their own house. At 8 o'clock, with full darkness settled outside and only the grandfather clocks ticking to mark the time, they stood at the door that separated the servants' wing from the main house. Willa had a key, of course. She'd had it for 43 years, but she'd rarely used it after Garrison's death. The main house had become a museum to them, a place they maintained but didn't inhabit. The door swung open smoothly, well-oiled hinges testament to Thad's regular maintenance. They stepped into the grand foyer, and even after all these years, Willa felt a flutter of awe. The space rose 3 stories, topped by a domed skylight that let in moonlight. The staircase curved up in an elegant spiral, mahogany banister gleaming even in the dark. "This way," Thad said, consulting the blueprint he'd brought. "Libraries through the east corridor." They walked through rooms filled with furniture draped in white sheets, ghostly shapes in the flashlight beams, past the dining room where Garrison had once hosted parties for 50 guests, past the music room where an ancient piano sat silent, untouched for decades, past the portrait gallery where Ashford ancestors stared down with stern, painted faces. The library was at the far end of the corridor, double doors carved with intricate designs. Thad pushed them open. The smell of old paper and leather washed over them, familiar and comforting. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with thousands of volumes. Garrison had been a reader, a collector. Some of these books were probably worth small fortunes themselves. "According to the blueprints," Thad said, shining his light at the drawing, "the door should be behind the bookshelf on the north wall. There's a mechanism somewhere, a hidden latch." They approached the indicated wall, Willa running her hands along the shelves, feeling for anything unusual. The books were dusty but arranged neatly, organized by some system only Garrison had understood. History, philosophy, art, literature, all the accumulated knowledge of a lifetime. "Here," Thad said suddenly. His light had caught something, a gap between 2 books where there should have been none. He reached in and pulled. There was a click, then a grinding sound of old gears engaging. The entire bookshelf, 12 feet wide and reaching to the ceiling, swung inward like a massive door. Behind it was darkness and a passage carved into the wall itself. Willa's heart hammered in her chest. "My God," she whispered, "it's real." They stood at the threshold, flashlight beams piercing the dark corridor ahead. The passage was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, with stone walls and a floor that descended in a gentle slope. The air that breathed out was cool and dry, artificially controlled. "That's climate control," Thad said, recognizing the quality of the air. "Something's running back here, something that needs temperature regulation." "Only one way to find out what," Willa replied, and before she could second-guess herself, she stepped into the passage. Thad followed close behind, one hand on her shoulder. Their footsteps echoed softly as they descended. The passage ran straight for about 30 feet, then turned sharply right. Willa counted steps unconsciously, a habit from childhood when she'd been afraid of the dark. 27 steps to the turn, then 17 more before the passage opened into a small antechamber. And there, set into the wall like a bank vault, was a door. It was steel, modern-looking despite the age of the surrounding structure. No handle, no visible lock, just a smooth surface with a small panel at chest height. Thad shined his light on it. The panel had a single circular recess about 2 inches in diameter. "It's a lock," he said, "but not any kind I've ever seen." Willa studied it, then looked back at the blueprints. There was no notation about what kind of key would fit this lock, no indication of where such a key might be kept. "Maybe we need a code," she suggested, "or a key card." "In 1878, Thad replied. "This door might be modern, but it was installed in an old passage. Garrison must have upgraded the security at some point, but he would have used a system that made sense to him." Willa thought about Garrison Ashford, the man they'd known for 15 years before his death. A man of habits and rituals, a man who collected books and art and kept his own counsel, a man who'd trusted them to care for his estate but never fully let them in. "What if the key is something we already have?" she said slowly. "Something he knew we'd never think to use this way." "Like what?" Willa pulled out the key ring she always carried, the one with keys to every door in the estate. She tried each one in the circular lock, but none fit. Too small, wrong shape, ordinary keys for ordinary doors. Then Thad said, "Wait, remember when Garrison died? The lawyer gave us a lockbox with important documents. There was that weird medal thing inside, the one we could never figure out." Willa's breath caught. She did remember. A heavy bronze medallion about 2 inches across, hung on a chain. They'd assumed it was some kind of military honor or family crest. It had been in their dresser drawer for 28 years, forgotten. "I'll go get it," Thad said, already turning. "No," Willa replied. "We'll go together. I'm not staying down here alone." They hurried back through the passage, through the library, through the corridors to the servants' wing. Willa went straight to the bedroom, pulled open the dresser drawer, and dug through old scarves and handkerchiefs until her fingers closed on cool metal. The medallion was heavier than she remembered, bronze that had tarnished to dark green in places. One side showed an elaborate crest, unfamiliar. The other side was smooth, except for a phrase in Latin. "Custos secretorum," guardian of secrets. They rushed back through the empty house, their flashlights casting wild shadows, back through the library, through the passage to the steel door waiting in the darkness. With trembling hands, Willa held the medallion up to the circular lock. It was exactly the right size. She pressed it into the recess, felt it click into place. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the medallion began to turn, slowly, mechanically, clicking through what sounded like a series of tumblers. 5 clicks, 6, 7. The sound echoed in the small antechamber like a heartbeat. On the 10th click, the medallion stopped turning. There was a deep thunk of heavy bolts withdrawing. The steel door, which had seemed so solid, so immovable, swung inward 1/2 inch on perfectly balanced hinges. Willa and Thad looked at each other in the flashlight's glow. Neither spoke. Words felt inadequate for this moment, for whatever lay beyond that door. Thad reached out and pulled it open wider. Lights flickered on automatically, responding to motion sensors. Brilliant white light flooded the space beyond, so bright after the darkness that both of them threw up their hands to shield their eyes. When Willa's vision adjusted and she could finally see what lay before them, her knees went weak. She grabbed Thad's arm to steady herself, heard his sharp intake of breath. They were standing at the top of a short staircase that descended into a chamber roughly 30 feet square. The walls were lined with climate-controlled glass cases, each one illuminated from within, and in those cases, on the walls, arranged on pedestals and suspended from the ceiling, was more treasure than Willa had ever imagined existed in one place. Paintings in ornate frames, colors so vivid they seemed alive, sculptures of marble and bronze, catching the light like frozen dancers, jewelry that glittered with enough gemstones to stock a dozen stores, manuscripts behind glass, illuminated pages visible, ancient coins in neat rows, silk tapestries stretched on frames, objects dar from every era and culture, carefully labeled, meticulously preserved. They descended the stairs slowly, moving as if in a dream. Willa stopped in front of the first painting, a landscape of yellow and blue that swirled with familiar brushstrokes. A small brass plate beneath it read, "Vincent van Gogh, Wheatfield with Cypresses, 1889. "That's not possible," she whispered. "That painting hangs in the Metropolitan Museum. I've seen postcards." "Or this is the original, and what hangs in the museum is a copy," Thad said, his voice strange and distant. He'd moved to the next painting, this one showing a woman in Dutch dress. Rembrandt. I recognized the style from Garrison's art books. They walked the room in stunned silence, stopping at each case, each pedestal, each mounted treasure. There were Monet and Renoir and Degas. There was jewelry that looked ancient, Byzantine and Roman and older. There were manuscripts in languages Willa couldn't read, illuminated with gold leaf that still shone after centuries. There were sculptures that seemed too perfect to be real, marble rendered into flesh by hands that had been dust for millennia. At the far end of the room sat a desk, old oak but solid. On it lay a leather-bound journal, thick with pages. Willa approached it reverently, afraid to touch, afraid not to. The leather was worn smooth, the binding fragile. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakably Garrison's, those precise letters she'd seen on notes he'd left them over the years. But the date at the top made her blink. March 3rd, 1942. She began to read, Thad looking over her shoulder. "If you are reading this, then I am gone, and you have found what I have protected all these years. I do not know who you are, but if you have come this far, if you have opened what I sealed, then perhaps you are meant to know the truth. I am not a hero. I want that understood from the start. What I did out of conscience, not courage. In the spring of 1939, as war spread across Europe, I found myself in a position to help. My family's business had connections in Germany, France, Austria. We knew people. We heard stories before the rest of America believed them. Jewish families were fleeing. They were desperate. They were selling everything they owned for passage, for papers, for hope. And what they owned, many of them, were treasures. Art collections built over generations. Manuscripts preserved through centuries. Heirlooms that connected them to a history older than nations. I bought these things. I paid fair prices when I could, less than fair when I couldn't. I told myself I was helping them escape, giving them money for new lives. And I was. But I was also taking their history, their heritage, everything they'd saved. Willa turned the page, her hands shaking. Some of the families made it. Some didn't. I received letters from a few, thanking me for the help, asking me to hold on to their possessions until they could reclaim them. I agreed. I promised. I built this vault to keep everything safe, to preserve what they'd had to leave behind. But the letters stopped coming. The war ended. I waited. Years passed. I tried to find them, these families, but the Holocaust had swallowed them whole. No survivors to claim this collection. No heirs to return it to. What was I to do? Sell it? Profit from genocide? Donate it to museums who would never know the blood that purchased each piece? I couldn't. So I sealed it here. I kept it safe. I told myself that someday, somehow, the right people would come. That justice would find a way. I am old now, 91 in a few months if I live that long. I never married, never had children. There is no one to tell, no one to trust with this burden, except perhaps the two people who have cared for this house as faithfully as I could have hoped, Willa and Thaddeus Crane. If you are reading this, Willa and Thad, then you have found my secret, and now you must decide what to do with it. I cannot tell you what is right. I never figured that out myself, but I trust you will do better than I did. You will find a way to honor these people, these lost families, in a way I never could. Below I have listed each piece in this collection, where it came from, who owned it, what I paid. It is not enough. It will never be enough. But it is the truth. Forgive me, and forgive them if you can for abandoning these treasures to save their lives. They had no choice. Neither did I. Neither do you, perhaps. Garrison Ashford, December 1996. Willa closed the journal carefully, tears streaming down her face. Beside her, Thad wept silently, one hand pressed to his mouth. They stood in that underground chamber, surrounded by $310 million worth of art and history and stolen lives, and understood that they were no longer just two elderly people being evicted from their home. They were witnesses. They were guardians. They were the last link to families who had perished and treasures that had survived. And they had 16 days to decide what to do about it. They didn't leave the vault that night. Couldn't leave. Willa sank into the old desk chair while Thad moved through the room like a man in a trance, stopping at each case, each pedestal, reading every brass plate, every notation. The silence between them was thick with the weight of what they'd found, what Garrison's journal had revealed, what now rested in their hands. "Willa," Thad said finally, his voice hoarse. He was standing in front of a glass case containing jewelry, dozens of pieces arranged on midnight blue velvet. "Look at this." She rose stiffly, her joints protesting, and joined him. The case held necklaces, bracelets, rings, brooches, each piece more exquisite than the last. Emeralds the size of thumbnails, diamonds that caught the light and threw rainbows, gold work so intricate it seemed impossible that human hands had shaped it. But it was the small cards beneath each piece that made Willa's breath catch. Handwritten in Garrison's careful script, each card told a story. Ruby necklace, Austrian, circa 1860. Belonged to the Hartmann family, Vienna. Sold March 1939 to secure passage to England. Family arrived safely. Daughter Miriam wrote in 1946, asking if her grandmother's necklace had survived. I could not bring myself to respond. Another card. Diamond and sapphire bracelet, French, 18th century. Cohen family, Paris. Purchased April 1940. Family deported to Auschwitz, 1942. No survivors. And another. Pearl and gold brooch, German, 19th century. Bauer family, Berlin. Traded for travel documents, August 1938. Last letter received October 1943 from hiding in Amsterdam. No further contact. Willa read card after card, each one a life, a family, a story that had ended in ash and silence. She thought about Garrison living here for decades, walking past this sealed door every day, carrying these names, these faces, these ghosts. How had he borne it? "There must be 100 pieces of jewelry alone," Thad said quietly. "And the paintings. Willa, I counted 12 on this wall. That Van Gogh, I looked it up once in one of Garrison's books. The museum paid $82 million for their version. If this is the original—" "Don't," Willa said sharply. "Don't start calculating value. These aren't just assets, they're memories. They're all that's left of people who were erased from the world." Thad nodded slowly. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's just the scope of this. It's overwhelming." They spent another hour exploring the vault. There were sculptures so old they predated Christ, Greco-Roman pieces that belonged in museums. There were illuminated manuscripts from medieval monasteries, pages glowing with gold leaf and pigments that hadn't faded in 800 years. There were drawings by masters whose names Willa recognized from Garrison's art books: Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael. Quick sketches that were somehow more moving than finished paintings. In one corner stood a collection of religious artifacts: menorahs, Torah scrolls in silver cases, prayer shawls folded carefully behind glass. Each piece labeled with the synagogue it had come from, the rabbi who had entrusted it to Garrison, the promise that it would be kept safe until the war ended. The war had ended 80 years ago. No one had ever come to reclaim them. "We need to document everything," Willa said, pulling herself back to practical matters. "Take photos, make lists. Garrison kept records, but we need our own." "With what?" Thad asked. "We don't have a camera except that disposable one from 2006. Willa thought for a moment. "Juniper's phone. She has one of those smartphones with a good camera, but we can't tell her yet. Not until we understand what we're dealing with." "She's going to be angry we didn't call her immediately." "She'll understand," Willa said, though she wasn't entirely sure. We need time to think, to process, to figure out what this means. They climbed back up the stairs, through the passage, through the library. Willa turned for one last look at the vault, its contents glowing in the artificial light, before Thad pulled the bookshelf closed behind them. The mechanism clicked softly, sealing the secret once more. In the servants' kitchen, Willa made tea neither of them wanted, while Thad sat at the table with Garrison's journal, reading through the detailed inventory at the back. Page after page of items, dates, families, prices paid. 32 pages in Garrison's meticulous handwriting, a catalogue of loss. He lists 347 individual pieces, Thad said, ranging from a small bronze statue, he paid $200 for it in 1940, to that Van Gogh, $15,000 in 1939. 15,000, Willa repeated. That probably seemed like a fortune to whoever sold it. Enough to buy passage for a whole family, new identities, a fresh start. If they made it, Thad said quietly. Willa sat down across from him. Outside, dawn was breaking, pale light filtering through the kitchen window. They'd been awake all night. She felt hollowed out, exhausted not in her body, but in her soul. What are we going to do? She asked. Thad closed the journal carefully. I don't know, but Willa, we have to tell someone. We can't just leave this here. In 14 days, demolition crews are going to tear this place apart. They'll find the vault. And then what? It'll get seized by the development company or the state or whoever has the best lawyers. It'll get tied up in court for decades. Or we could just walk away, Willa said. Pretend we never found it. Let it be someone else's problem. Even as she said it, she knew it was impossible. They'd seen the names on those cards, read Garrison's anguished words. They were witnesses now. They had a responsibility. We can't walk away, Thad said, confirming what she already knew. Garrison trusted us. Even if he never told us directly, he trusted us to be the kind of people who would do the right thing. What is the right thing? Willa asked. Who does this collection belong to? The families are gone. Do we try to find descendants, track down survivors? What if there aren't any? What if everyone connected to these pieces is dead? Then it belongs to all of them, Thad said. Every survivor, every family touched by the Holocaust. There are museums, foundations, organizations that preserve this kind of history. They'd know what to do. Or we could sell it, Willa said quietly, testing the words. Garrison kept records of what he paid. We could honor that. Sell everything. Put the money in trust for Holocaust survivors, their descendants. $310 million could help a lot of people. Thad looked at her steadily. Is that what you want to do? Willa thought about the ruby necklace, about Miriam Hartman, who had written in 1946 asking about her grandmother's jewelry. Garrison hadn't responded. Had kept it hidden. Had Miriam spent the rest of her life wondering what had happened to that piece of her past? Had she died never knowing it had been safe all along? I don't know what I want, Willa admitted. I just know we have 14 days to figure it out. They tried to sleep, but couldn't. By 9 in the morning they were back in the vault, this time with purpose. Thad had found an old camera in a drawer, film still in it from some long-ago event. It would have to do. Willa began photographing methodically, standing in front of each piece, angling the camera to capture both the object and its identification card. The flash bounced off glass cases, making the colors of the paintings seem even more vivid. She worked slowly, carefully, aware that these photos might be the only record they had. Thad transcribed Garrison's inventory into a new notebook, copying each entry word for word. His handwriting was shaky from exhaustion and emotion, but he persisted. Every item, every name, every detail. It took him 3 hours to reach the end. What happens next will turn these final days upside down, reveal a truth that could destroy lives or save them, and remind us why sometimes the heaviest burdens are the ones we choose to carry. Stay tuned to see what happens next. If you're enjoying the story, please like, share, and subscribe for more. By noon, they had documented everything they could. 27 photos taken, inventory copied, Garrison's journal carefully wrapped in a plastic bag for protection. Willa locked the vault again, the bronze medallion cool in her palm as she withdrew it from the mechanism. "We need to tell Juniper," Thad said as they climbed back through the passage. "Today. She needs to know." Willa nodded. She'd been thinking the same thing. Whatever they decided to do, they couldn't do it alone. Juniper was sharp, practical, connected to resources they didn't have. And more than that, this was her heritage too. She deserved to know what Garrison had left behind. They called her from the servants' kitchen. She answered on the second ring, voice breathless. "Thank God. I was just about to call you. I found a possible apartment. It's small, but it's—" "Juniper," Willa interrupted. "We need you to come here, now. There's something you have to see." "What kind of something?" Juniper's tone shifted immediately, alert to the tension in her grandmother's voice. "Just come," Willa said, "and bring your phone, the one with the camera." "Is everything okay? Are you hurt? Did something—" "We're fine," Thad called out. "Just come, please." She arrived 40 minutes later, parking haphazardly and rushing through the servants' entrance. "What's going on? You're scaring me." Willa and Thad looked at each other. Where did they even begin? "We found something," Willa said finally. "In the house. Something Garrison hid. Something valuable." "Valuable how?" Juniper asked. "Like antiques? We can sell those, that's good news. That could give you some money to—" "Not antiques," Thad interrupted. "Come with us. You need to see it." They led her through the main house, through the corridors she'd walked as a child, to the library. Juniper looked around, confused. "The library? I've been in here 1,000 times." "Not in here," Willa said. She pulled the hidden books, activated the mechanism. The bookshelf swung inward. Juniper's eyes went wide. "What the— Is that a secret passage?" "We found blueprints in the attic," Thad explained. "This passage has been here since 1878, but Garrison sealed it off. Or we thought he did." They descended into the passage, Juniper's phone flashlight bobbing ahead of them. When they reached the steel door, Willa held up the bronze medallion. "Garrison left us this 28 years ago. We never knew what it was for until last night." She pressed the medallion into the lock. The mechanical clicks echoed in the small space. The door swung open, lights blazed. Juniper stepped into the vault and stopped so suddenly that Willa nearly ran into her. Her phone slipped from her hand, clattered on the floor. She didn't bend to pick it up. She just stood there, mouth open, staring. "Grandma," she whispered finally, "what is this?" 347 pieces of art, jewelry, manuscripts and artifacts, Thad said. "Collected by Garrison Ashford between 1939 and 1944. Purchased from Jewish families fleeing the Holocaust. He kept them hidden here for over 50 years. Juniper walked forward slowly, like someone in a dream. She stopped in front of the Van Gogh, the yellow wheat field blazing under the lights. "This can't be real. This has to be a reproduction." "It's real," Willa said. "They're all real. And Juniper, they're worth more money than we can comprehend." "How much?" Juniper asked, still staring at the painting. "Garrison's records suggest around $310 million, Thad said. "Possibly more. We don't really know how to calculate these things." Juniper turned to face them, and Willa saw her granddaughter's sharp mind already working through implications, complications, possibilities. "When did you find this?" "Last night," Willa admitted. "Around 8 o'clock. We've been down here ever since, trying to understand what it means." "And you didn't call me?" "We needed time to process," Willa said. "Juniper, this isn't just about money. Read Garrison's journal. Read what he wrote. These pieces belong to people who died in the Holocaust. Families that were erased. This collection is all that's left of them." She handed Juniper the journal. Her granddaughter read standing up, one hand pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. When she finished, she closed it carefully and looked around the vault with new eyes. "My God," she said. "He lived with this for 50 years, knowing what he had, knowing where it came from. How did he stand it?" "I don't think he did," Thad said quietly. "I think it destroyed him a little more each day. That's why he became such a recluse. That's why he sealed this room. He couldn't bear to look at it, but he couldn't let it go either." Juniper was quiet for a long moment. Then, in her practical paralegal voice, she asked, "Okay, what are our legal obligations here? Who owns this?" "That's what we can't figure out," Willa said. "Garrison bought these pieces legally. He has receipts, bills of sale. Technically, they belong to him, and when he died, they became part of the estate." "Which means they now belong to the trust," Juniper finished. "Which has been dissolved. Which means they belong to Rockland Development." "That can't be right," Thad protested. "Garrison didn't want them sold. He wanted them preserved, returned to survivors if possible." "What Garrison wanted doesn't matter legally," Juniper said. "Not unless he put it in writing in his will. Did he?" Willa and Thad looked at each other. They'd never seen Garrison's will. They'd just been notified by the trust lawyers that the estate was being maintained, that they should continue as caretakers. "We need to find out," Juniper said. "The original will would be filed with the county. I can pull it tomorrow, but guys, we have 13 days until you have to vacate. If this collection is part of the estate sale, Rockland Development will own it, and they'll sell it to the highest bidder without a second thought." "Then we don't tell them," Willa said. "We keep it secret." "For how long?" Juniper asked. "Demolition starts in 6 weeks. They'll find it." "Then we move it," Thad suggested. "Before demolition. Take everything out, store it somewhere safe." 347 pieces, Juniper said. "Some of them weighing hundreds of pounds. Where would we even put it? My apartment? A storage unit? Guys, we're talking about climate-controlled preservation. These pieces have been maintained at exact temperature and humidity for decades. We can't just throw them in the back of a truck." She was right. Willa could see that. But the alternative, letting Rockland Development find the vault, seize everything, sell it off piece by piece to private collectors who would hide it away again, that was unacceptable. "There has to be another way," Willa said. "Someone who could help us, an organization, a museum, someone who deals with this kind of thing." Juniper pulled out her phone, started typing. "Holocaust Museum," she said. "There's a national one in Washington, smaller ones around the country. They have departments that handle recovered art, looted property. They'd know what to do." "Would they help us?" Thad asked. "Or would they just call the authorities, have everything seized?" "I don't know," Juniper admitted. "But we need expert advice. This is way beyond property law or estate issues. This is international art recovery, Holocaust restitution, historical preservation. We're in over our heads." They spent the next hour discussing options, arguing in circles, getting nowhere. Every path forward seemed blocked by legal complications or ethical dilemmas or simple logistics. Move the collection? How? Reveal it? To whom? Keep it secret? For how long? Finally, exhausted and frustrated, they climbed out of the vault. In the library, surrounded by Garrison's beloved books, Willa sank into an old leather chair. "What would he want us to do?" she asked aloud. "Garrison. If he were here, what would he tell us?" Thad thought for a moment. "I think he'd want us to protect it, keep it safe, make sure it ended up somewhere meaningful, somewhere that would honor the people it came from." "But he had 50 years to do that himself," Juniper pointed out. 50 years to contact museums, reach out to survivor organizations, arrange for proper restitution. Why didn't he? Willa thought about the anguish in Garrison's journal, the shame that seeped through every word. Because he was afraid of being judged for profiting from the Holocaust, even if he'd paid fair prices. Afraid of the legal consequences, afraid of the publicity. Garrison valued privacy above everything. "Well, we don't have the luxury of privacy," Juniper said. "Not with 13 days left. We need to make a decision." They looked at each other, 3 generations in a dusty library, holding a secret that could change lives or destroy them. "Tomorrow," Willa said finally. "We'll decide tomorrow. Tonight we need rest. We need to think clearly." "Okay," Juniper agreed reluctantly. "But Grandma, Grandpa, don't do anything without me. Promise me. Whatever you decide, we decide together." They promised. After Juniper left, Willa and Thad returned to the servants' wing. Willa made sandwiches they didn't eat. Thad tried to read the newspaper, but gave up after 10 minutes. They were too wired, too overwhelmed, too conscious of the fortune sitting beneath their feet and the impossible choice weighing on their shoulders. "I keep thinking about Miriam Hartman," Willa said as evening darkened the windows. "The one who wrote asking about her grandmother's necklace. She was alive in 1946. She might still be alive now. She'd be what, in her 90s? "Probably," Thad said. "There are survivors still living. I saw something on the news last month, an interview with a woman who'd been at Auschwitz. She was 97 years old." "What if we could find her?" Willa asked. "Miriam Hartman. What if we could give her back her grandmother's necklace?" Thad looked at his wife. "You want to track down individual families? Willa, even if we could find them, and that's a big if, we'd have to reveal the collection. Once we contact one person, word will spread. The legal fights alone would take decades." "I know," Willa said. "I know it's impossible. But that's what Garrison should have done, isn't it? That's what would have been right. Tracking down every single family, returning every single piece." "Garrison tried," Thad reminded her gently. "He says so in the journal. He looked for survivors after the war. Most were dead. The rest were scattered across the world, names changed, identities hidden. How was he supposed to find them?" "The same way we have to find answers now," Willa said, "by not giving up." They sat in silence for a while. Then Thad said, "You know what keeps bothering me? The timing. Garrison dies in 1997. The estate goes into trust. 28 years pass, and now, just weeks after we're told to vacate, we find this vault. Why now?" "You think it's not coincidence?" Willa asked. "I think Garrison knew this house would be sold eventually. He must have known we'd have to leave. And he left us that medallion, left us in this house, trusted us to be the ones who'd eventually explore, eventually find it. Maybe he wanted us to be the ones who decided what to do with it." Willa considered that. It made a strange kind of sense. Garrison had been nothing if not deliberate, every action calculated, every choice intentional. "So he left us a test," she said slowly. "Or maybe not a test, a trust. He trusted us to handle this better than he did." "Then we can't let him down," Thad said. That night, Willa dreamed of faces, dozens of them, hundreds pressing close in the darkness. Old faces, young faces, faces from photographs she'd seen in history books. They didn't speak, didn't accuse, they just watched, waiting to see what she would do. She woke at 3 a.m, heart pounding. Beside her, Thad was awake too. "I had the strangest dream," he said. "Me too." They lay in the darkness, not touching, each lost in their own thoughts. The grandfather clock chimed 3 times, echoing through the empty house. In 12 days, that clock would stop. In 12 days, they'd be gone, and someone else would inherit this burden. Unless they did something about it first. In the morning, Willa made a decision. She called Juniper before breakfast. "I want to contact the Holocaust Museum," she said without preamble. "Today. I want to talk to someone who knows about recovered art, who can tell us our options." "Okay," Juniper said carefully. "But Grandma, once we make that call, there's no taking it back. Once we tell someone official, the secret is out." "I know," Willa said, "but keeping it secret feels wrong. Garrison kept it secret for 50 years and it destroyed him. I won't let that happen to us. I'll make the call, Juniper said. Give me an hour. She called back in 45 minutes. I got through to someone in their art recovery division. Her name is Dr. Estelle Margolis. She specializes in Nazi-looted art. When I described what we found, very generally, no specifics, she went quiet for about 30 seconds. Then she asked if she could come see it. When? Willa asked. She's catching a flight tonight, Juniper said. She'll be here tomorrow morning. Grandma, she sounded, I don't know, emotional, like this was something she'd been waiting her whole life to hear about. Okay, Willa said. Okay, we'll meet her tomorrow. She hung up and turned to Thad. We're committed now. Good, he said. I'm tired of secrets. They spent the rest of that day trying to return to normal routine. Thad mowed the lawn. Willa dusted the parlor, but every task felt hollow, pointless. In 11 days this place would belong to developers. In 11 days it would start coming down, unless Dr. Estelle Margolis could help them find another way. That evening, as sunset painted the western sky orange and gold, Willa and Thad walked the grounds together. They held hands, something they hadn't done in years, and traced the paths they'd walked for 4 decades. Past the fountain that didn't work, through the wild gardens, around the greenhouse with its cracked glass. Whatever happens, Thad said, we did our best. We took care of this place. We honored Garrison's trust. We can be proud of that. I am proud, Willa said, but I'm also scared. What if Dr. Margolis says the collection has to be seized? What if we're accused of theft or hiding evidence? What if— Then we face it together, Thad interrupted, like we've faced everything else. Together. They stood at the edge of the property, looking back at Thornhill Manor. Lights glowed in a few windows, making the mansion look almost alive, almost inhabited. Willa thought about all the lives that had passed through this place. The Ashfords who'd built it, Garrison who'd guarded it, the families whose treasures lay hidden beneath it. And now her and Thad, 2 old caretakers who'd stumbled into something bigger than they could have imagined. I'm glad we found it, Willa said quietly. Even with everything that comes next, I'm glad we know. Garrison shouldn't have had to carry this alone. And those families, they deserve to be remembered. Their things deserve to be seen, honored, preserved. We'll make sure they are, Thad promised. However we can, whatever it takes, we'll make sure their stories get told. They walked back to the servants' wing as darkness fell. Inside, Willa made tea, and they sat at the kitchen table with Garrison's journal open between them. They read through the entries again, slower this time, paying attention not just to the items listed, but to the words Garrison had written between the lines. I am haunted, he'd written in an entry dated July 1963, by the silence. I walk past the vault door every day and hear nothing. But in my mind, the silence screams. It screams with the voices of everyone who died. It screams with the beauty they created, the history they preserved, the love they put into each piece. And I am the only one who knows, the only one who remembers. How much longer can I bear this alone? 40 years he'd borne it, Willa thought. 40 years of silence and guilt and impossible decisions. She wouldn't wish that on anyone. Tomorrow changes everything, she said to Thad as they prepared for bed. Yes, he agreed. Tomorrow we trust someone else with the secret. Tomorrow we let someone help us carry the weight. Are we doing the right thing? Willa asked. Thad took her hand. I think we're doing the only thing we can. The rest is up to people smarter than us. They slept poorly again, but this time Willa didn't dream. She just lay awake, listening to the house settle around them, the creaks and sighs of old wood and older memories. Somewhere below, in a sealed vault behind a false bookshelf, $310 million in stolen history waited to be reclaimed, redeemed, returned to the world that had tried to erase it. And in 11 days, if they did nothing, it would be found by people who saw only value, not meaning. People who would sell it to the highest bidder, scatter it to private collections, lock it away from the very people it belonged to. Willa couldn't let that happen. Whatever it cost her, whatever consequences came, she would make sure Garrison's collection found its way home, even if she didn't know yet where home was. Dr. Estelle Margolis arrived at 9 in the morning, stepping out of a rental car with the careful movements of someone who'd spent too many hours traveling. She was smaller than Willa had imagined, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair cut short and eyes that held decades of knowledge and sorrow. She wore a simple grey suit and carried a leather briefcase worn soft with age. "Mrs. Crane?" she called, walking toward where Willa stood at the servants' entrance. "Willa, please," Willa said, extending her hand. "And this is my husband, Thaddeus." Dr. Margolis's handshake was firm despite her small stature. "Estelle, thank you for contacting us. I have to admit, when your granddaughter called yesterday, I thought it might be another false lead. We get them sometimes, people who think they've found something significant." "This is significant," Thad said quietly. "We're certain of that." "Then I'm eager to see it," Estelle replied. "But first, I need to understand the circumstances. How did you discover this collection? What's your connection to the property?" They led her inside, made coffee, and spent an hour explaining. 43 years as caretakers. Garrison Ashford's death. The estate in trust, the eviction notice, the blueprints in the attic, the sealed vault, Garrison's journal. Estelle listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes in a small leather notebook. When they finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Garrison Ashford, I know that name, or I did once. Back in the late 90s, there were rumors in certain circles about a collector who'd helped Jewish families escape. The stories were vague, unconfirmed. Some said he'd taken advantage of desperate people. Others said he'd saved lives. The truth was probably somewhere in between." "He kept records," Willa said. "Detailed records of every piece, who he bought it from, how much he paid. He seemed tortured by what he'd done." "May I see the journal?" Estelle asked. Willa retrieved it from the kitchen drawer where they'd stored it overnight. Estelle opened it reverently, reading Garrison's opening entry with an intensity that made the room feel smaller. When she reached the part about the families who'd perished, who'd never come to reclaim their possessions, tears gathered in her eyes. "My grandmother," she said softly, not looking up from the page, "was from Warsaw. She escaped in 1939 with my mother, who was 6 years old. They left everything behind. Paintings, jewelry, books that had been in the family for generations. My grandmother spent the rest of her life wondering what had happened to it all. She died in 1994, never knowing." She closed the journal carefully. "This collection, if it's what you say it is, represents hundreds of stories like my grandmother's. Families who had to choose between their lives and their history. Most of the time, the history was lost, destroyed, looted, scattered. If Garrison really preserved these pieces, if he kept them safe for 70 years, her voice broke. That's extraordinary." "We want to do right by them," Willa said. "The families, the survivors, but we don't know how, and we're running out of time." "How much time?" Estelle asked. 10 days, Juniper said, speaking up for the first time since Estelle had arrived. 10 days until my grandparents have to vacate. The property's been sold to a development company. They're planning to demolish the mansion. Estelle's head snapped up. "Demolish? When?" "Demolition's scheduled to begin 6 weeks from now," Juniper said. "But if they find the vault during their preliminary inspections, which they will, they'll claim everything as part of the property sale." "That cannot happen," Estelle said firmly. "These pieces need to be properly evaluated, authenticated, and returned to their rightful owners or heirs. That process takes time, documentation, legal frameworks. If a development company seizes them, they'll tie everything up in litigation for decades. That's what we're afraid of, Thad said. So what do we do? Estelle thought for a moment. First, I need to see the collection, verify its authenticity. Then we need to move quickly. The Holocaust Museum has protocols for situations like this. We can take emergency custody of recovered art, especially when there's a threat of loss or dispersal. Can you do that legally? Juniper asked, her paralegal instincts engaged. Without the current property owner's permission. If the collection was obtained through duress during the Holocaust era, there are international laws that supersede normal property rights, Estelle explained. The Washington Principles, Terezin Declaration, multiple treaties and agreements. Nazi-looted art doesn't belong to whoever currently holds it. It belongs to the victims and their heirs. But Garrison paid for these pieces, Willa pointed out. He has receipts. Paid how much? Estelle asked. Fair market value? Or desperate sale prices from people fleeing genocide? There's a legal and moral difference. Forced sales during the Holocaust are not considered legitimate transactions. She stood, businesslike now. Show me the vault. I need to see what we're dealing with. They led her through the mansion, through the library, to the hidden bookshelf. Willa activated the mechanism and watched Estelle's expression as the passage revealed itself. Incredible, Estelle murmured. He built this whole system just to hide them. They descended into the passage, the cool air raising goosebumps on Willa's arms despite her cardigan. At the steel door, Willa pressed the bronze medallion into the lock. The familiar mechanical clicks echoed. The door swung open, lights blazed. Estelle stepped into the vault and stopped breathing. Willa had seen that reaction in herself 2 days ago, in Thad, in Juniper. But watching someone who'd devoted her life to recovering lost art encounter 347 pieces of Holocaust history all at once, that was different. Estelle's hand went to her mouth. Her legs seemed to give out. Thad caught her elbow, guided her to the stairs, let her sit. "Oh my God," Estelle whispered. "Oh my God, it's real." She sat there for 5 minutes, just looking, tears streaming down her face. Finally, she stood on shaky legs and approached the nearest painting. The Van Gogh, wheat field with cypresses. "This hung in the Goldstein family home in Amsterdam," she said, reading the identification card. "I know this piece. It's been listed as lost since 1940. The Metropolitan has a similar version, but scholars have always debated which was the original." She leaned closer, examining the brushstrokes. "This is the original. I can tell from the underpainting technique. The Met has the study. This is the finished work." She moved to the next piece, a Rembrandt portrait. "This is from the Meyer collection, Berlin. Looted by the Nazis in 1941. There are descendants still living in Israel who've been searching for this." Piece by piece she walked the vault, identifying paintings, sculptures, manuscripts. With each one, her professional demeanor cracked a little more, revealing the raw emotion beneath. "That necklace," she said, stopping in front of the jewelry case, pointing to the ruby piece. "The Hartman family. Miriam Hartman wrote a memoir in 1996. I met her once at a conference. She's still alive, Willa. She lives in Montreal. She's 94 years old." Willa's breath caught. "She's alive?" "Yes," Estelle said. "And she has grandchildren, great-grandchildren. This necklace, it's not just valuable, it's their history. It's the only physical connection they have to ancestors who were murdered." She turned to face them, and Willa saw determination blazing in her eyes. "We have to move this collection, all of it, immediately, before the developers know it exists. The museum has a secure facility, climate-controlled, legally protected. We can transport everything there, begin the authentication and restitution process." "How?" Juniper asked. "We're talking about 347 pieces, some of them massive. We can't just throw them in a moving truck." The museum has specialized transport teams, Estelle said. Conservators trained in handling irreplaceable art. We can have them here in 48 hours, but we need permission from the current legal owners to enter the property. The trust is dissolved, Juniper said. The property belongs to Rockland Development as of 6 days ago. They own it, even if the final paperwork isn't filed yet. Then we need to move before they realize what's here, Estelle said. This is technically still in a transition period. If we can document that the collection was hidden before the sale, that it wasn't part of the property inventory, we might be able to argue it should be excluded from the transaction. That's a thin legal argument, Juniper warned. It's the one we have, Estelle replied. Unless you have a better idea. They didn't. So they began planning. Estelle made calls from the servants' kitchen, her voice low and urgent. Willa caught fragments. Yes, Van Gogh, multiple Rembrandts. I'm not exaggerating. We need a team immediately. While she talked, Juniper pulled up property records on her phone, trying to determine the exact legal status of the estate. Thad made sandwiches no one ate. Willa sat at the table with Garrison's journal, reading entries she'd already memorized, finding strange comfort in his tortured words. The transport team can be here day after tomorrow, Estelle announced, hanging up. That's the soonest they can mobilize. They're coming from Washington with proper equipment, climate-controlled trucks, security. But Willa, Thad, we need to work fast. Once we start moving pieces, we can't stop. It has to be done in one operation. How long will it take? Thad asked. If everything goes smoothly, 10 to 12 hours. We'll work through the night if we have to. And if someone from Rockland Development shows up? Willa asked. If they decide to inspect the property? Estelle's expression was grim. Then we have a problem. That afternoon, while Estelle photographed and documented every piece in the vault, Juniper made a discovery. She was reviewing the purchase agreement Rockland Development had signed, looking for loopholes, when she found something. Guys, she called out. They were all in the vault, Estelle systematically cataloguing, Willa and Thad assisting. I found something in the contract. What? Willa asked. There's a clause here about undisclosed assets. It says if any significant undisclosed assets are found on the property after sale, they remain property of the trust, not the buyers. It was probably meant for oil rights or mineral deposits, but legally it could apply to anything. So the collection doesn't belong to Rockland? Thad asked hopefully. Not automatically, Juniper said. But the trust is dissolved. So if the collection doesn't belong to Rockland and the trust doesn't exist anymore, then legally… She trailed off, thinking. Legally, it might belong to you. You were residents. You found it. Garrison left you the key, even if you didn't know what it opened. That's an interesting argument, Estelle said. But it would take months to litigate. We don't have months. No, Juniper agreed. But it means if we move the collection now, we're not necessarily stealing from Rockland. We're preserving assets that were never part of the sale in the first place. It was a thin reed to cling to, legally speaking, but it was something. They worked until dark, Estelle filling out forms and taking measurements, Willa and Thad answering questions about Garrison, about the house, about how they'd found the vault. By the time they climbed back up to the servants' wing, all four of them were exhausted. Estelle accepted their offer of the guest room, the small space that had once been their daughter's bedroom. Over a dinner of soup and bread, they talked about logistics, timing, contingencies. The transport team arrives at 6 in the morning day after tomorrow, Estelle said. We'll need to get them in and out without attracting attention. Do you have neighbors? People who might notice trucks? The property's 40 acres, Thad said. The nearest neighbor is half a mile away, but we're on a public road. People drive by. We'll work at night then, Estelle decided. Have the team stage at a location nearby during the day, then move everything after dark. That gives us tomorrow to prepare, Willa said. To make sure we haven't missed anything, to pack Garrison's records, to… The phone rang, shrill in the quiet kitchen. They all froze. Willa glanced at the clock. 8:42 at night. Who would call this late? She picked up. "Hello? Mrs. Crane?" A man's voice, unfamiliar. "This is Cornelius Vance from Rockland Development. I hope I'm not calling too late." Willa's blood went cold. "Mr. Vance, what can I do for you?" "I wanted to give you advance notice that we'll be conducting a property inspection tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, standard procedure before demolition. We'll need access to the entire structure, including any sealed or locked areas." Willa's mind raced. Tomorrow morning, 9 hours before the transport team arrived. "I'm not sure we can accommodate that on such short notice. We're still packing our personal belongings and—" "The inspection is required by our insurance company," Vance interrupted smoothly. "It's non-negotiable. We'll be there at 9 whether you're ready or not. We have legal right to access now that the sale is complete." "I understand," Willa said, keeping her voice steady. 9 o'clock then." She hung up, turned to face the others. "They're coming tomorrow, 9 in the morning, to inspect the entire property." "Including the West Wing?" Juniper asked. "He specifically mentioned sealed or locked areas." Estelle's face had gone pale. "They know. Somehow they know there's something here." "How could they know?" Thad asked. "We've told no one except you." "Garrison's journal entries mention the vault," Estelle said. "If any of those entries were ever filed with the estate documents, if any lawyer ever read them—" "They would have told Rockland," Juniper finished, "to increase the property value." They sat in heavy silence. Finally, Willa spoke. "Then we move it tonight. All of it. We can't wait for the professional team." "Willa, we can't," Estelle protested. "We don't have proper equipment, proper transport. We could damage irreplaceable pieces." "And if Rockland finds them?" Willa shot back. "What then? They'll seize everything, tie it up in court, sell it off to private collectors. At least if we move it, we can protect it." "With what?" Juniper asked. "We don't have a climate-controlled truck. We don't have security. Where would we even take it?" "My church," Thad said suddenly. "St. Margaret's. They have a basement, climate-controlled because they store historical documents there. Father Michael's a good man. He'd help us." "You want to hide $310 million worth of art in a church basement?" Juniper said incredulously. "Just temporarily," Thad insisted, "until Estelle's team can collect it properly. It's better than letting Rockland find it." Estelle pressed her hands to her temples, thinking hard. Finally she said, Okay, it's risky, but you're right. We don't have a choice. I'll call my team, have them come tonight instead of tomorrow. They can drive straight through. They'll be exhausted, but it's our only option." "How long?" Willa asked. "They left Washington 3 hours ago for an overnight stop in Richmond. If I call now, tell them to keep driving. They could be here by 5 in the morning." "That gives us 8 hours," Juniper said. 8 hours to get everything out before Vance shows up at 9. "Then we better get started," Willa said. The next 4 hours were a blur of frantic activity. Estelle called her team, explained the emergency. They would drive through the night, arrive at 5 in the morning. In the meantime, the 4 of them began the painstaking work of preparing the collection for transport. They couldn't move the pieces themselves, too delicate, too valuable. But they could document everything, wrap protective covering around the cases, create a clear path for the transport team. They worked in shifts, 2 in the vault at a time, 2 resting briefly upstairs. Willa had never been so tired. Her back screamed with every bend. Her hands shook from exhaustion and adrenaline. But she kept moving, kept working, driven by the certainty that if they failed, if Rockland Development seized this collection, Garrison's 50 years of guilt and preservation would be for nothing. Around midnight, as Willa was wrapping protective foam around a glass case of ancient coins, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Thad appeared, carrying 2 mugs of coffee. "Thought you could use this," he said. She took the mug gratefully, savoring the warmth. They sat together on the stone floor of the vault, surrounded by the treasures of lost families, and for a moment just breathed. "Are we crazy?" Willa asked. "Trying to move all this ourselves?" "Probably," Thad admitted. "But I'd rather be crazy and trying than sensible and surrendering." "What if we get caught? What if Vance calls the police, has us arrested for theft?" "Then we tell the truth," Thad said simply. "We tell them about Garrison, about the families, about why these pieces matter. We let Estelle and her museum back us up. We trust that the right thing will prevail." "And if it doesn't?" Thad took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. "Then at least we tried. At least we didn't let it happen without a fight." At 2 in the morning, Father Michael arrived. Juniper had called him, explained vaguely that they needed help with an urgent move, and to his credit, he'd asked no questions. He was 78 years old, retired, but still active in the parish, with kind eyes and the patient strength of someone who'd spent a lifetime helping people through impossible situations. "Show me what we're dealing with," he said simply. They took him to the vault. His reaction was quieter than the others, more contained. But Willa saw him cross himself when he saw the Torah scrolls, saw his lips move in silent prayer when he read the names on the identification cards. "These people," he said softly. "They trusted their most precious things to strangers, hoping someone would keep them safe. And someone did. For all these years, someone did." "Now we need to keep them safe a little longer," Willa said. "Then let's do it," Father Michael replied. "St. Margaret's is ready. The basement's secure, temperature-controlled, locked. I'm the only one with a key. We can hide them there as long as necessary." "It might be months," Estelle warned, "until we can sort out the legal issues, establish proper provenance, contact heirs." "Then it's months," Father Michael said. "God didn't preserve these treasures for 70 years just to let them fall into the wrong hands now." At 4:30 in the morning, headlights appeared at the end of the long driveway. 3 large vehicles moving slowly, no company markings. The transport team had arrived. Estelle met them at the servants' entrance, giving rapid instructions. There were 6 people total, 2 drivers, 4 art handlers trained in museum-quality transport. They wore gloves, carried specialized equipment, moved with quiet efficiency. "We have 4.5 hours, Estelle told them. "Everything in that vault needs to be loaded and moved before 9 in the morning. Can you do it?" The team leader, a woman named Angela with silver hair tied back in a bun, surveyed the vault entrance. "We can do it, but we'll need clear paths, good lighting, and people to direct us." "You have all 3, Willa assured her. They worked like a machine. Angela's team moved pieces one at a time, carrying paintings in specialized frames, sculptures on padded dollies, jewelry cases in locked boxes. Each item was logged, photographed, numbered. Nothing left the vault without documentation. Willa and Thad directed traffic, showing the team the fastest routes through the mansion, helping carry lighter pieces, staying out of the way when needed. Juniper documented everything on her phone, creating a video record of the entire operation. Father Michael coordinated with his church, making sure the basement was prepared, spaces cleared, lighting adequate. And Estelle supervised it all with the focus of a general commanding troops. She checked every piece before it left the vault, verified every number, ensured nothing was forgotten. The sun rose at 6:23. They'd moved half the collection. 2.5 hours remained. "Faster," Estelle urged her team. "We can't leave anything behind." They picked up the pace. The larger sculptures required 4 people to carry. The paintings were packed in custom boxes built on site. The manuscripts went into climate-controlled containers that hummed with refrigeration. Everything moved with agonizing slowness, even as everyone rushed. At 7:45, they finished loading the last truck. The vault was empty except for Garrison's desk and the bronze medallion, which Willa had removed from the lock and tucked into her pocket. "Check everything," Angela said to her team. Make sure we didn't miss anything. They swept through with flashlights, examining every corner, every shelf, every surface. Nothing remained but dust and empty cases. "We're clear," Angela reported. "Then go," Estelle said. "Drive directly to St. Margaret's. I'll meet you there in 30 minutes. The trucks rolled out, quiet as ghosts in the morning light. Willa watched them disappear down the driveway, carrying 347 pieces of Holocaust history to temporary safety in a church basement. It was 8:15. They had 45 minutes before Vance arrived. They moved fast, closing the vault door, sealing the passage, pushing the bookshelf back into place. Upstairs, they straightened furniture, wiped away footprints, eliminated any sign that dozens of people had just orchestrated a massive covert operation. By 8:45, the house looked exactly as it had the day before, neat, empty, waiting for inspection. "You should all leave," Willa told Estelle, Juniper, and Father Michael. "If Vance sees you here, he'll ask questions." "I'm not leaving you alone with him," Juniper protested. "We'll be fine," Thad assured her. "This is just a property inspection. He has no idea what was here or what's gone. We'll play dumb, show him around, let him measure and photograph whatever he wants." Reluctantly, the others agreed. By 8:55, Willa and Thad stood alone in the servants' kitchen, watching through the window as a black SUV pulled up the driveway. Cornelius Vance stepped out. He was younger than Willa expected, maybe 45, with slicked-back hair and an expensive suit that looked absurd in the rustic setting. He carried a briefcase and wore an expression of barely concealed impatience. "Mr. and Mrs. Crane," he said, not offering to shake hands. "Thank you for accommodating the inspection on short notice." "Of course," Willa said pleasantly. "Would you like some coffee before we start?" "No time," Vance replied. "Let's begin with the West Wing. I understand it's been sealed for decades." Willa's heart skipped. "That's correct. The previous owner said the structure was unsound." "Our engineers will determine that," Vance said. "Lead the way." They walked through the mansion, Vance making notes on a tablet, taking photos, running his hands along walls and door frames like he was searching for something. When they reached the library, he stopped. "This room," he said. "The blueprints show additional space behind this wall that doesn't match the current layout." "Old houses often have discrepancies between plans and reality," Thad said casually. "Walls get moved, rooms divided." Vance walked along the bookshelf, the one that hid the passage. He pressed against it, testing. Willa held her breath, but the mechanism was locked. The shelf didn't budge. Vance said. He made another note. They continued through the West Wing, Vance inspecting every room, every closet, every corner. He found nothing because there was nothing to find. The vault was sealed, its contents gone, its secret safe. After 2 hours, Vance closed his tablet. "That's all I need. You have 8 days to complete your move out. After that, we take possession and demolition begins." "We understand," Willa said. Vance left without another word. As his SUV disappeared down the driveway, Willa's legs finally gave out. She sat heavily in the kitchen chair, shaking with relief and residual adrenaline. "We did it," Thad said wonderingly. "We actually did it." Willa started to laugh, then couldn't stop. Thad joined her, and they sat in their kitchen, two elderly people who'd just pulled off an impossible heist, laughing until tears rolled down their faces. They'd saved it. Garrison's collection, the family's treasures, 70 years of history. They'd saved it all. 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Willa and Thad continued packing their personal belongings, creating the appearance of two elderly people preparing to leave their home of 43 years. But in reality, they were coordinating with Estelle, who'd set up a command center in Father Michael's rectory office. The collection sat safely in St. Margaret's basement, climate-controlled and secure. Estelle's team worked around the clock, documenting, authenticating, researching provenance. Each piece was photographed from multiple angles, compared against historical records, cross-referenced with databases of Holocaust-era looted art. "It's extraordinary," Estelle told them over the phone on the third evening. "Every piece Garrison claimed was authentic actually is. The Van Gogh alone is worth 85 million. The Rembrandt portraits, 30 million each. We've identified owners or heirs for 47 pieces so far. The Hartmann family ruby necklace, the Maya Rembrandt, manuscripts from destroyed synagogues. Willa, we're reuniting history with the people it was stolen from." "What about the legal issues?" Willa asked. "Rockland development, the property sale, all of that?" "That's where things get complicated," Estelle admitted. "I've been in touch with our legal team at the museum. They're preparing arguments based on international treaties regarding Holocaust-era assets. But Willa, Rockland has filed a claim. They're arguing that anything found on the property belongs to them as the new owners." "Even though the collection wasn't part of the inventory?" Thad asked. He was listening on the extension. "They're arguing it doesn't matter," Estelle said. "They bought the property and everything on it. Their lawyers are aggressive. This is going to court." "When?" Willa asked. "Emergency hearing tomorrow morning," Estelle replied. 9 o'clock, County Courthouse. You'll both need to be there. So will I. We're asking the judge to grant the museum temporary custody while ownership is determined." "And if the judge sides with Rockland," Willa asked, though she dreaded the answer, "then we fight it, appeal, take it to federal court if necessary, international tribunals if we have to. Willa, Thad, I promise you, this collection will not end up in private hands. Too many people know about it now. There would be international outcry." But international outcry took time, and in 5 days Willa and Thad would be homeless. That night, neither of them slept. They lay in bed listening to the grandfather clock chime each hour, counting down their remaining time in the only home they'd known for decades. At dawn, they rose and dressed carefully. Willa wore her one good dress, the navy blue one she saved for funerals. Thad put on a suit he hadn't worn in 15 years, the fabric tight across his shoulders. Juniper picked them up at 7:30. She looked professional in a charcoal blazer, her wild curls tamed into submission. "Sterling's meeting us at the courthouse," she said. "He's reviewed the case. It's not good, Grandma. Rockland has a strong legal position. Found property generally belongs to the landowner." "But these aren't just found property," Willa protested. "They're Holocaust artifacts. There are special laws." "Which is what Estelle's team will argue," Juniper said. "But the judge might not see it that way. We have to be prepared." The courthouse was a 3-story brick building in the center of town, built in 1923 and showing its age. They climbed the worn stone steps, passed through security, and found courtroom 3 on the 2nd floor. Estelle was already there, standing with 2 lawyers in expensive suits. She introduced them as counsel from the Holocaust Museum's legal department. Across the aisle sat 3 lawyers representing Rockland Development, and behind them Cornelius Vance himself, looking smug and confident. Sterling Huxley shuffled in moments before the bailiff called for all to rise. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Patricia Delacroix, with sharp eyes and a reputation for impatience with legal theatrics. "I've reviewed the briefs," Judge Delacroix said, settling into her chair. "This is an unusual case. Mr. Harrison, you represent Rockland Development." One of the expensive lawyers stood. "Yes, Your Honor. Our position is straightforward. My client purchased the Thornhill estate in a legitimate transaction. Anything found on that property after purchase belongs to them. The Cranes were employees who exceeded their authority by removing property without permission." "The property in question wasn't part of the sale inventory," Estelle's lawyer countered, rising. "It was sealed in a hidden vault for over 70 years. Mr. Ashford's journal makes clear these were Holocaust-era assets held in trust for victims and survivors. International law recognizes special status for such items." "International law doesn't supersede property rights in North Carolina," Harrison shot back. Judge Delacroix held up a hand. I've read about these international treaties, the Washington Principles, the Terezin Declaration. They're guidelines, not binding law in my courtroom. What I need to understand is the chain of custody. Mr. Ashford owned these pieces legitimately? He purchased them from Jewish families fleeing Nazi persecution, Estelle's lawyer explained. Whether those sales were truly voluntary given the circumstances is debatable, but yes, he had bills of sale. And when he died, they became part of his estate. Technically, yes, though they were never inventoried or disclosed to the trust administrators. Because they were hidden, Harrison interjected, deliberately concealed, which suggests Mr. Ashford knew they were problematic. Now they've been found on my client's property, and my client has every right to them. Your Honor, Sterling Huxley stood, his voice reedy but determined. May I speak on behalf of my clients, Mr. and Mrs. Crane? Judge Delacroix looked surprised. You represent the Cranes? Yes, Your Honor. They've been caretakers of the Thornhill estate for 43 years. They were given a medallion key by Mr. Ashford that opened the vault. This suggests he intended for them to eventually discover the collection. Or he lost track of what the medallion opened, Harrison said dismissively. We're talking about a man who died nearly 30 years ago. Speculation about his intentions is irrelevant. Is it speculation? Sterling pulled out a document. I have here a letter written by Garrison Ashford in 1996, 1 year before his death. It was filed with his personal papers at the Historical Society. In it, he explicitly states that if anything should happen to him, Willa and Thaddeus Crane are to be trusted with matters of historical significance that may come to light on the estate grounds. That's a direct quote. The courtroom went quiet. Willa had never seen this letter. From Sterling's expression, neither had anyone else until recently. Where did you find this? Judge Delacroix asked. The Historical Society archives, Sterling said. I went looking after the Cranes told me about the collection. Seemed prudent to check if Garrison had left any instructions. Harrison was on his feet. That letter is vague. It could refer to anything. It doesn't specifically mention the art collection. It mentions historical significance, Sterling countered. What else could he have meant? Could we hear from the Cranes themselves? Judge Delacroix asked. Mrs. Crane, would you approach the bench? Willa's legs shook as she stood. She walked to the witness stand, was sworn in, sat down facing the courtroom. Judge Delacroix's expression was unreadable. Mrs. Crane, tell me in your own words what happened. How did you discover this collection? Willa took a breath and began. She told the whole story. The eviction notice, the blueprints in the attic, the sealed passage, the vault, Garrison's journal. She spoke about reading his words, understanding his torment, realizing what they'd found wasn't just valuable but sacred. We didn't take those pieces for ourselves, Willa said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. We didn't see dollar signs. We saw names, families, people who'd lost everything and trusted a stranger to keep their treasures safe. Garrison kept them safe for 50 years. We just wanted to make sure they got to where they belonged, back to the families or to museums that would honor them or to organizations that help Holocaust survivors, anything but private collectors who'd lock them away again. Why didn't you notify Rockland Development when you found them? Judge Delacroix asked. Because we were afraid they'd do exactly what they're doing now, Willa said. Claim ownership, sell to the highest bidder. These aren't just paintings and jewelry, Your Honor. They're all that's left of people who were murdered. Their memories made physical. They deserve better than being auctioned off like furniture. She saw several people in the courtroom wiping their eyes. Even Harrison looked uncomfortable. Judge Delacroix was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Harrison, does your client intend to sell these pieces if awarded ownership? Harrison hesitated. Rockland Development is a business. They would seek to recoup their investment in the property by selling Holocaust artifacts to private collectors. by liquidating assets in accordance with standard business practices. I see. Judge Delacroix made a note. Dr. Margolis, you represent the Holocaust Museum? Estelle stood. Yes, Your Honor. What is your institution's interest here? Restitution, Estelle said simply. Returning these pieces to their rightful owners or heirs, where no heirs exist, preserving them in public collections where they can educate future generations about what was lost. We've already identified descendants for 47 pieces. We have the infrastructure, expertise, and moral authority to handle this properly. And the pieces with no living heirs would be held in trust for the Jewish community as a whole, displayed in museums, loaned to educational institutions, used to ensure the Holocaust is never forgotten. Judge Delacroix leaned back. Here's my problem. Legally, Rockland has a strong case. They bought the property. They own what's on it. But morally, this situation is more complex. These aren't ordinary assets. They represent one of history's greatest atrocities. She paused, thinking. The courtroom held its breath. I'm going to issue a temporary restraining order, she finally said. The collection will remain in the Holocaust Museum's custody while we sort out the legal questions. I'm ordering both parties to work together on authentication and provenance research. If descendants are found, they have first claim regardless of who technically owns the pieces. Rockland, you can pursue your property claim, but any sale must wait until every piece has been fully researched and every possible heir located. That process could take years. Harrison started to object, but Judge Delacroix silenced him with a look. Furthermore, she continued, I'm directing the State Attorney General to investigate whether any of these pieces qualify as Nazi-looted art under international law. If they do, Rockland's claim is void, period. We'll reconvene in 60 days for a status hearing. Until then, nobody sells anything. Understood? Both legal teams nodded. Mrs. Crane, Judge Delacroix said, her voice softening, you and your husband showed remarkable integrity in a difficult situation. This court recognizes that. You're free to go. Willa returned to her seat on shaky legs. Thad squeezed her hand. Juniper was crying quietly, relieved. They'd won. Not completely, not permanently, but for now, they'd won. Outside the courthouse, Estelle pulled them aside. This is going to attract media attention, she warned. The story's too good. Elderly caretakers discover hidden Holocaust treasure. Reporters will want interviews. We don't want attention, Willa said. This isn't about us. I know, Estelle said gently. But the attention might help. Public pressure could force Rockland to back down, and it could help us find more descendants. Some families might not know what their ancestors lost. Seeing these pieces in the news might jog memories, connect dots. She was right. By that evening, the story had broken. Local news picked it up first, then state outlets, then national. By the next morning, Willa and Thad's faces were on the television. Elderly couple saves $300 million in Holocaust art, read one headline. Hidden treasure recovered after 70 years, said another. The phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting interviews, documentary filmmakers wanting access, random people calling to say thank you or share their own family's Holocaust stories. It was overwhelming. But something beautiful came from it too. Families started reaching out. A woman in Tel Aviv saw a photo of a menorah and recognized it from her grandmother's stories. A man in New York saw a painting and knew instantly it had hung in his great-grandfather's study in Vienna. Piece by piece, connections were made. 2 weeks after the hearing, Estelle called with news. Miriam Hartman saw the coverage. She recognized her grandmother's ruby necklace. Willa, she wants to meet you. 3 days later, Willa and Thad stood in the lobby of St. Margaret's Church as an elderly woman walked in, supported by her daughter. Miriam Hartman was 94 years old, small and frail, but her eyes were sharp and bright. You're the ones who found it, she said, her accent still carrying traces of Vienna. You're the ones who kept it safe. Garrison kept it safe, Willa said. We just made sure it got to you. They led her to the basement where the collection was temporarily stored. When Miriam saw the ruby necklace behind its glass case, she gasped and began to cry. Her daughter held her as she wept. "My grandmother wore this the night we fled," Miriam said through tears. "She sold it to a man who promised to keep it safe. My whole life I wondered what happened to it. If it was destroyed, sold, lost. I never imagined—" She couldn't finish. Estelle carefully removed the necklace from its case. "It's yours," she said simply. "It always was." Miriam held it with trembling hands, touching each ruby like it was sacred, and in that moment, Willa understood. This wasn't about money or legal ownership or property rights. This was about a 94-year-old woman holding a piece of her grandmother, touching history that should have been hers all along. "Thank you," Miriam whispered. "Thank you for giving her back to me." Other families came. Some cried, some stood in silence. All of them touched their recovered treasures with the same reverence, the same relief. Each piece returned was a wound beginning to heal, a story reclaimed from silence. 6 months passed. The legal battles continued, but slowly, Rockland Development's position weakened. Public opinion turned against them. International pressure mounted. Eventually, they settled. In exchange for a tax write-off and positive publicity, they relinquished all claims to the collection. The pieces were free to be returned, to be displayed, to tell their stories. The Holocaust Museum organized a special exhibition. Recovered, the Thornhill collection opened to crowds so large they had to implement timed entry. Willa and Thad attended the opening, uncomfortable in their formal clothes, overwhelmed by the attention. They stood in front of the Van Gogh, remembering the night they'd first seen it glowing in the vault. Now it hung in a place of honor, its identification card telling the full story. Who'd painted it, who'd owned it, who'd sold it fleeing genocide, who'd kept it hidden, who'd recovered it. "Your grandfather would be proud," a voice said behind them. They turned. A young woman stood there, maybe 30, with kind eyes. "I'm Sarah Meyer," she said. "My great-great-grandfather owned that Rembrandt portrait. It's been returned to my family. We're donating it to the museum so everyone can see it, but I wanted to thank you first. You gave me a connection to ancestors I never knew. You gave me my history." Over the course of the evening, dozens of people approached with similar stories. Descendants of the families Garrison had helped. Survivors who recognized pieces from their childhood. Educators who would use the collection to teach about the Holocaust. Historians who would research and document what had been preserved. And through it all, Willa kept thinking about Garrison. Garrison who'd lived with this burden for 50 years. Garrison who'd never known the joy of these reunions, these healings. Garrison who'd died alone, carrying secrets that had destroyed him from the inside. "He did the right thing in the end," Thad said, reading her thoughts. "Keeping them safe until the right people could help them find their way home." "We just finished what he started," Willa said. "No," Estelle said, joining them. She'd been listening. "You did what Garrison couldn't. You trusted others. You asked for help. You refused to carry the burden alone. That's what saved this collection. Not just preserving it, but sharing it." Late that night, back in the small apartment Juniper had helped them find, 2 bedrooms, affordable rent, nothing like Thornhill Manor but home nonetheless, Willa sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. The bronze medallion sat in front of her. She'd kept it, this key that had changed everything. Judge Delacroix had ruled it was theirs, a gift from Garrison, and Willa had accepted it not as a trophy, but as a reminder. "What are you thinking?" Thad asked, shuffling in, wearing his pajamas. "I'm thinking about choices," Willa said. "We could have walked away, pretended we never found the vault, let it be someone else's problem." "But you didn't," Thad said. "We didn't," Willa corrected. "We chose to care. We chose to protect something that wasn't ours, that gave us nothing but trouble because it was the right thing to do." "And now?" Thad asked. "Now we get to see it matter," Willa said. We get to see families reunited with their history. We get to know that Garrison's 50 years of preservation meant something. She picked up the medallion, feeling its weight. On it were engraved the words Custos Secretorum, guardian of secrets. "We're not guardians anymore," she said. "The secrets are told, the treasures are returned, we did what we were supposed to do." Thad kissed the top of her head. "Then we can rest." But they didn't rest, not entirely. In the months that followed, they became advocates. They spoke at schools about the importance of preservation, about choosing courage over comfort. They worked with the Holocaust Museum on educational programs. They helped other families who'd discovered questionable heirlooms research their provenance. And every Sunday they visited Thornhill Manor, or what was left of it. Rockland Development had demolished most of the structure, but under pressure from historical societies, they'd preserved the library and the passage to the vault. It was designated a historical landmark, open to the public as a small museum about Garrison Ashford and the collection he'd protected. Willa stood in the empty vault one Sunday afternoon, 6 months after everything had changed. The glass cases were gone. The treasures were scattered to their rightful homes. Only Garrison's desk remained, and on it his journal, encased now in protective glass for visitors to read. "You can let go now," Willa whispered, not sure if she was talking to Garrison or herself. "Your burden is lifted. Your secret is light. You did what you could, and we did the rest. You can rest now." In the silence of the empty vault, she felt something shift. Not something supernatural, just a sense of completion, of a story finally finished. They climbed back up to the library, where Thad waited. Together, they walked out into the sunshine. The grounds were being converted into a memorial park. The fountain was being restored. New trees were being planted. Life was returning to Thornhill Manor, but different now, open, shared, meaningful. "You know what I realized?" Willa said as they walked toward their car. "What's that?" "We spent 43 years maintaining this place for someone else, keeping it perfect, keeping it preserved, never really making it ours. And in the end, that preparation, that caretaking, that's exactly what was needed. We were being trained all those years to be the guardians the collection needed." "You think Garrison knew that?" Thad asked, "when he hired us?" "Maybe," Willa said. "Or maybe the universe just puts the right people in the right place at the right time. Either way, we were meant to be here. We were meant to find it. We were meant to do what we did." They drove back to their small apartment, this new home that would never hold decades of memories like Thornhill had, but was theirs in a way the manor never was. Juniper was waiting on the steps with take-out Chinese food and a new photo she'd printed. Willa and Thad standing in the museum beside the Van Gogh, looking small and bewildered and proud. "For your wall," Juniper said, hugging them both. "For when you forget your heroes." "We're not heroes," Willa protested. "You're my heroes," Juniper said simply. "You taught me that doing the right thing matters more than doing the easy thing. That's everything, Grandma. That's the whole point." That night, Willa hung the photo on the wall of their bedroom. She looked at it for a long time, this evidence of an impossible journey, from eviction notice to international news, from secret vault to global restitution, from 2 elderly caretakers to guardians of history. "We did good," she said to Thad as they prepared for bed. "We did what needed doing," Thad replied. And really, Willa thought as she turned off the light, that was the same thing. Anyone can change the world if they're brave enough to choose compassion over comfort, if they're willing to protect what matters even when it costs them everything, if they understand that some treasures are meant to be shared, not hidden. As morning light warmed the walls of their small apartment, Willa Crane didn't reach for old blueprints or bronze medallions. She reached for her husband's hand, for her granddaughter's weekly call, for the purpose she'd discovered in her 74th year. The caretakers who'd once maintained an empty mansion had become the voices for silenced families, the bridge between past and present. The proof that ordinary people can guard extraordinary things. Because for Willa and Thad and every person who'd stood with them, history wasn't something to profit from or hide away. It was something to honor, to share, to ensure would never be forgotten. And in saving Garrison's collection, they'd saved more than art. They'd saved memory itself. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories waiting for you. Click to keep discovering truth, courage, and the kind of quiet heroism that changes everything. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe some secrets deserve to be told.